Welcome to our channel. Today we delve into the chilling realm of human experimentation, uncovering some of history's most disturbing studies that push the boundaries of ethical conduct. From the infamous Tuskegee syphilis experiment, where African-American men were left untreated to study the progression of the disease, to the harrowing accounts of Unit 731's inhumane atrocities during World War II, and the psychologically damaging Stanford prison experiment, we embark on a journey through some of the darkest chapters of scientific inquiry. Join us as we explore the creepiest experiments conducted on humans, shedding light on the ethical dilemmas and moral complexities that continue to haunt the annals of research. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment. One of the most infamous and ethically egregious experiments in medical history, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, stands as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked scientific inquiry. Lasting for 4 decades, this study, conducted by the U.S. Public Health Service, withheld treatment from African American men diagnosed with syphilis, denying them the basic right to medical care. Participants were deceived into thinking they were receiving treatment for bad blood, while in reality, they were left to suffer the debilitating effects of the untreated disease. The Tuskegee study underscores the importance of informed consent and ethical oversight in research, as well as the lasting impact of systemic racism in healthcare. Stanford Prison Experiment. Philip Zimbardo's Stanford Prison Experiment was intended to shed light on the psychological dynamics of power and authority. However, it quickly devolved into a nightmare of abuse and manipulation. College students were assigned roles as either guards or prisoners in a simulated prison environment. Shockingly, the guards began to exhibit sadistic behavior towards the prisoners, leading to psychological trauma and emotional distress among the participants. The experiment was terminated prematurely, highlighting the ethical boundaries that can be crossed in the pursuit of scientific knowledge and the importance of protecting human subjects from harm. Unit 731. In the shadows of World War II, the covert operations of Unit 731 represented a grotesque chapter in the annals of human experimentation. Operating under the Imperial Japanese Army, this unit conducted horrific experiments on prisoners of war, including vivisection, biological warfare testing, and forced exposure to deadly pathogens. Victims endured unimaginable suffering, often without anesthesia or regard for their humanity. Unit 731's atrocities serve as a stark reminder of the moral abyss that can be reached when science is co-opted for nefarious purposes, and the enduring scars left by wartime atrocities. The Monster Study. Wendell Johnson's Monster Study sought to explore the origins of stuttering, but its methods bordered on psychological abuse. Orphan children were divided into groups and subjected to different forms of speech therapy, some receiving positive reinforcement and others negative criticism. This manipulation led to lasting psychological harm, as children who did not exhibit stuttering were made to believe they had speech impediments. The study raises profound ethical questions about the treatment of vulnerable populations in research settings, and the responsibility of scientists to prioritize the well-being of their subjects. The Aversion Project. In the oppressive regime of apartheid South Africa, the Aversion Project epitomized the systematic persecution of marginalized communities. Aimed at curing homosexuality, this series of experiments subjected individuals to cruel and degrading treatments, including chemical castration and electroconvulsive therapy. Victims were often coerced or forced into participation, enduring lasting trauma as a result. The Aversion Project stands as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of scientific prejudice and the imperative of upholding human rights in all facets of research. The Milgram Experiment. Conducted by psychologist Stanley Milgram in the early 1960s, this experiment aimed to study obedience to authority figures. Participants were instructed to administer what they believed were increasingly severe electric shocks to another person, an actor, whenever they answered a question incorrectly. Despite the actor's apparent distress and pleas to stop, the majority of participants continued to administer shocks, highlighting the disturbing power of authority and obedience. The Harlow monkey experiments. Conducted by psychologist Harry Harlow in the 1950s and 1960s, these experiments explored the effects of maternal deprivation on infant rhesus monkeys. Monkeys were separated from their mothers shortly after birth and raised in isolation or with surrogate mothers made of wire or cloth. The findings revealed profound psychological distress in the isolated monkeys, exhibiting abnormal behaviors such as rocking, self-mutilation, and aggression, underscoring the critical importance of maternal care for healthy psychological development. The Little Albert experiment. Conducted by psychologist John B. Watson and his assistant Rosalie Rayner in 1920, this experiment aimed to demonstrate classical conditioning in humans. A 9-month-old infant known as Little Albert was exposed to various stimuli, including a white rat, a rabbit, a monkey, and masks. Whenever Albert reached for the white rat, a loud noise was made behind him, causing him to associate fear with the rat. As a result, Albert developed a phobia of not only white rats, but also other furry objects and stimuli, illustrating the unethical manipulation of a child's emotions and the lasting impact of early traumatic experiences. The Guatemala syphilis experiment. Conducted by American researchers in the 1940s, this experiment aimed to study the effectiveness of penicillin in treating syphilis. Without the consent of the subjects, Guatemalan prisoners, soldiers, and mental health patients were intentionally infected with syphilis and other sexually transmitted diseases. Despite the availability of penicillin as a cure, many subjects were left untreated, leading to unnecessary suffering and deaths, highlighting egregious ethical violations and disregard for human rights. The sleep deprivation experiments. Throughout history, researchers have conducted various studies on the effects of sleep deprivation by deliberately keeping participants awake for extended periods. One notable example is the Russian sleep experiment, an infamous but likely fictional account of Soviet researchers subjecting prisoners to extreme sleep deprivation and gas exposure to study the effects on their mental health. While the details of this particular experiment are questionable, real studies have shown that prolonged sleep deprivation can lead to hallucinations, cognitive impairment, mood disturbances, and even death. The LSD experiments. In the mid-20th century, the CIA conducted a series of covert experiments, collectively known as MK-Ultra, to explore mind control techniques and interrogation methods. One aspect of MK-Ultra involved administering LSD and other psychoactive drugs to unwitting participants, including soldiers, prisoners, and civilians, to study their effects on behavior and cognition. Many participants experienced severe psychological distress, including paranoia, hallucinations, and lasting trauma, without their informed consent. The human radiation experiments. From the 1940s to the 1970s, researchers in the United States conducted a series of unethical experiments involving the intentional exposure of human subjects to ionizing radiation. These experiments were conducted without the subject's knowledge or informed consent, and were often performed on vulnerable populations such as pregnant women, infants, and mentally disabled individuals. The long-term health consequences of radiation exposure were largely ignored, leading to needless suffering and premature deaths among the participants. The Stanford Marshmallow Experiment. Conducted in the late 1960s and early 1970s by psychologist Walter Mischel, this experiment aimed to study self-control and delayed gratification in children. In the experiment, children were offered a choice between receiving a small reward immediately or waiting for a larger reward later. The findings suggested that children who were able to delay gratification tended to have better life outcomes in terms of academic achievement, health, and social functioning. However, Critics argue that the experiment may have caused undue stress and anxiety in the participating children, raising ethical concerns about the use of children as research subjects. In conclusion, the examination of these chilling experiments on human subjects serves as a sobering reminder of the ethical dilemmas inherent in scientific inquiry and the imperative of safeguarding human rights and dignity. From the systemic racism of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment to the psychological torment of the Stanford prison experiment and the grotesque atrocities of Unit 731, these studies represent egregious violations of basic ethical principles. The Monster Study and the Aversion Project further underscore the potential for harm when vulnerable populations are subjected to unchecked scientific curiosity. As we reflect on these dark chapters of history, it is incumbent upon us to remain vigilant in upholding ethical standards in research and to ensure that the pursuit of knowledge never comes at the expense of human well-being. Let us heed the lessons of the past and commit ourselves to a future where scientific progress is achieved with compassion, integrity, and respect for the inherent dignity of every individual.